We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, this is a crucial moment if we're to gain control of the virus. Yet for 8 days, nearly 16,000 positive tests were missed by the government. That means about 48,000 contacts were not traced. As of yesterday, thousands had still not been reached. Does the Prime Minister accept that this very basic mistake has put lives at risk?
Mr Speaker, this is certainly a problem that we have fixed. The computer glitch error that he refers to has been addressed. All the 16,000 that he refers to have in fact got their positive test results and should be self-isolating. And as soon as we became aware of the missing data, we brought in 800 people to chase up those index cases, and we continue to chase their contacts, Mr Speaker. And I think it will be for the reassurance of the House and the country that the data points, the missing data points, do not, now that we look at them, change in any way our assessment of the epidemiology, the spread of the disease. And that's why we continue with our package to suppress the virus, not just nationally, but locally and regionally as well.
Keir Starmer.
Mr Speaker, this isn't just a technical issue, it's a human issue. And the attempted reassurance by the Prime Minister just doesn't wash. In Greater Manchester, some of the missing cases date back to September the 18th. That's 2.5 weeks ago, with 3 very serious consequences. It's now much harder to contact people after so long, the contacts of the 16,000. Even if they're contacted successfully, for many, the self-isolation period has already expired. And thirdly, important decisions on local restrictions were made using the wrong data. £12 billion has been invested in this system, and yet a basic Excel error brings it down. No wonder it's been described as intergalactic incompetence. So why, at this crucial moment, did it take so long to catch this error and to address it?
Well, Mr Speaker, you can't have it both ways. You can't call it a human error and a basic Excel error. And let me just remind the House of what and the right honourable gentleman of what I've just said, because the crucial thing is that, yes, of course there has been an error, but the data points that we're looking at do not change the cases that we're looking at, don't change the basic distribution of the disease. And I think it's very important for people to understand, because that's really what he was, I think, trying to drive at. And although the cases in the country are considerably up across the country this week on last week, the 7-day statistics, Mr Speaker, show that there are now 497 cases per 100,000 in Liverpool, 522 cases per 100,000 in Manchester, 422 in Newcastle. And the key point, Mr Speaker, there is that the local regional approach combined with the national measures remains correct, I think, because 2/3 of those admitted into hospital on Sunday were in the North West, the North East and Yorkshire. So that's why I think that approach continues to be correct.
Starmer.
Mr Speaker, the Prime Minister says it doesn't alter the basic distribution, yet thousands of people have been walking around where they should have been self-isolating. It patently has an effect on the basic distribution. If this was an isolated example, I think the British people might understand. But there's a pattern here on care homes, protective equipment, exams, testing. The Prime Minister ignores the warning signs, hurtles towards a car crash, then looks in the rear mirror and says, "What's all that about?" It's quite literally government in hindsight. Today is 100 days, Mr Speaker, since the first local restrictions were introduced. 20 local areas in England have been under restrictions for 2 months. Prime Minister, in 19 of those 20 areas, the infection rates have gone up. In Rosendale and Hyndburn, they've gone up tenfold. Yet all the Prime Minister has to say is it's too early to say if restrictions are working. But it's obvious that something's gone wrong here. So what's the Prime Minister going to do about it?
Well, Mr Speaker, as he knows, we're continuing to provide support, £5 billion of support for the North West, North East, for the lockdowns, the extra restrictions that they're experiencing, and we will continue to support all areas across the country that have to go into local measures. Now, 2 weeks ago, I set out that strategy. I said that we would go forward with national measures and such as intensifying the rule of six, making sure that we enforce the rule of six. 2 weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, he supported it. In fact, I think he went on the Nick Ferrari show saying that, yeah, I support the rule of six. Yes, I do. Yet last night, Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party abstained on the rule of six. He asked what we're doing to enforce. He asked what we're doing to enforce local measures. He can't even be bothered to get his own side to support them himself.
Mr. Speaker, for the Prime Minister's benefit, let me take this slowly for him. We support measures to protect health. We want track and trace to work. But the government is messing it up, and it's our duty to point it out. Let's get back to the questions, because these are not trick questions. I've got the figures here, Prime Minister. In Bury, when restrictions were introduced, the infection rate was around 20 per 100,000. Today it's 266. In Burnley, it was 21 per 100,000 when restrictions were introduced. Now it's 434. In Bolton, it was 18 per 100,000. Now it's 255. The Prime Minister really needs to understand that local communities are angry and frustrated. So will he level with the people of Bury, Burnley and Bolton and tell them what does he actually think the problem is here?
Mr. Speaker, the problem is, alas, that the disease continues to spread in the way that I described to the House earlier, and the figures that he gives are no surprise, since they're fundamentally repetitions of what I've already told the House. And what we are doing is a combination of national and local measures, which 1 week, Mr. Speaker, he comes to this House and supports, and the next week, mysteriously, he decides to whisk his support away, and he cannot even be bothered to mobilise his own benches to support something as fundamental as the rule of six, which he himself said only 3 weeks ago that he supported. He cannot continue to have it both ways. Does he support the rule of six? Yes or no?
Yes. But the government... Yes. But if the Prime Minister can't see, and hear local communities when they say the infection rate has gone up tenfold under restrictions, and he doesn't realise that's a problem, then that is part of the problem. Mr. Speaker, there's a further cause of anger. Prime Minister, if you actually listen to the question, we might get on better. There's further cause of anger. Lack of clarity about why particular restrictions have been introduced. For example, in the Prime Minister's own local authority, Hillingdon, today there are 62 cases per 100,000, yet no local restrictions. But in 20 local areas across England, restrictions were imposed when infection rates were much lower. In Kirklees, it was just 29 per 100,000. Local communities, Prime Minister, genuinely don't understand these differences. Can he please explain for them?
Mr. Speaker, I think actually that he's heard from me and heard repeatedly from the government why we're bringing in differentiated local restrictions. I've just given the figures for the North East and North West. I wish I could pretend, Mr. Speaker, that everything was going to be rosy in the Midlands or indeed in London, Mr. Speaker, where, alas, we are also seeing infections rise. And that's why we need a concerted national effort. We need to follow the guidance. We need hands, face, space, get a test if you have symptoms, and obey the rule of six, Mr. Speaker. And I think it quite extraordinary that the right honourable gentleman has just said that he personally supports the rule of six while allowing his entire party to abstain.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister can't explain why an area goes into restriction. He can't explain what the different restrictions are. He can't explain how restrictions end. This is getting ridiculous. Next week, this House will vote on whether to approve the 10 p.m. rule. The Prime Minister knows that there are deeply held views across the country in different ways on this. One question is now screaming out: is there a scientific basis for the 10 p.m. rule? The public deserve to know. Parliament deserves to know. If there is, why doesn't the government do itself a favour and publish it? If not, why doesn't the government review the rule? So will the Prime Minister commit? Will the Prime Minister commit to publishing the scientific basis for the 10 p.m. rule before this House votes on it next Monday?
Mr. Speaker, the basis on which we set out the curtailment of hospitality was the basis on which he accepted it 2 weeks ago, and that is to reduce the spread of the virus, Mr. Speaker, and that is our objective. That's why we introduced the rule of 6, Mr. Speaker, which again he supported only 2 weeks ago, and yet last night they have said, and today they're withdrawing their support for other restrictions. What kind of a signal, Mr. Speaker, does this send to the people of the country about the robustness of the Labour Party and their willingness to enforce the restrictions? Mr. Speaker, that's not new leadership, that's no leadership. And we are taking the tough decisions that are necessary, imposing restrictions, which we don't want to do, Mr. Speaker, but imposing restrictions locally and nationally to fight the virus, to keep young people, keep kids in education, and keep the bulk of our economy moving. And at the same time, Mr. Speaker, we are getting on with our agenda, our lifetime skills guarantee, our green industrial revolution, by which we will take this country forward and build back better.
John Stevenson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Two of the government's central policies are levelling up and housing. Carlisle and Cumbria needs further infrastructure investment, but it does have the capacity for increased housing development, especially with the Garden Village to the south of Carlisle. The government therefore has the opportunity to help with both its levelling up agenda while reducing the strain on housing in the south of England. To achieve this, the government could move parts of government departments out of London to the provinces, but not Manchester and Leeds. Would the Prime Minister therefore let me know when he proposes to move a government department to Carlisle?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've spent at least one very happy night out in Carlisle, and I know it's a wonderful place, and I will certainly look with interest at the honourable gentleman's suggestion. We do have an ambitious programme to disperse, to unite and level up across our country.